In the heart of ancient Tamoenchan, the celestial paradise where flowers never wither and the rivers sing with the voices of eternity, there exists a story that rises like the fragrance of blossoms carried on the wind. It is the tale of a goddess whose beauty was not merely a gift, but a force, an inexhaustible, intoxicating current that coursed through the veins of gods and mortals alike. Her name was Xochiquetzal, and to speak it aloud was to invite the memory of 1,000 perfumes, the softness of petals brushing the skin, and the heat of desire blossoming in the chest. The world of the Aztecs was one of creation and destruction, of love entwined with war, of gods who danced between tenderness and cruelty. Within such a world, Xochiquetzal shone as the eternal flower, untouched by decay. She was said to walk barefoot across gardens that bloomed only in her presence, each step coaxing new life from the soil. Where others bore the marks of time, she carried the promise of renewal. She was fertility, she was beauty, she was the whisper in the ear of every lover who longed in the dark. Tamoenchan, the dwelling place of this divine enchantress, was no ordinary realm. Legends described it as a paradise suspended between earth and sky, veiled in soft mist that glowed with eternal light. Trees bent under the weight of blossoms that never faded, and streams ran thick with sweetness instead of water. It was said that the very air there could intoxicate the heart, filling lungs with longing and overwhelming the senses. To step within Tamoenchan was to abandon all else, for it was impossible to resist the pull of its wonders. And at the center of this paradise, Xochiquetzal reigned, not as a queen demanding obedience, but as a muse who inspired both reverence and unrest in every soul who gazed upon her. Her presence was the union of contradictions, innocence and seduction, playfulness and gravity, tenderness and fire. She embodied the fleeting moment of spring where the earth trembles with awakening, when blossoms reach their peak bloom, only to fall, soft and inevitable, into the currents of time. To the Aztecs, she was the living essence of pleasure itself, both the sweetness of honey on the lips and the sharp ache of yearning in the chest. Many gods adored her. Many mortals dreamed of her. Yet her essence was untouchable, as elusive as the fragrance of a flower carried away by wind. To desire her was to know both ecstasy and sorrow, for Xochiquetzal could never belong to one alone. She was too vast, too infinite, too entwined with the pulse of life itself. She belonged to the world, yet remained forever beyond it, shimmering just out of reach. And yet this tension between possession and freedom, between devotion and jealousy, was the heart of her story. For while Xochiquetzal's beauty was celebrated, it was also envied, and envy among gods was a dangerous thing. To gaze upon her was to ignite a spark of longing that could grow into a fire, and fires, once unleashed, consume without mercy. Her myth is not one of idle admiration, but of passion and struggle, of beauty that both heals and destroys. Close your eyes and imagine her. She appears not with thunder or grandeur, but with the subtlety of a garden blooming at dawn. Her hair flows like rivers of night, adorned with garlands of marigolds and roses, woven so intricately that each flower seems to breathe with its own life. Her skin glows as though kissed by the sun and cooled by moonlight, a harmony of warmth and softness. Around her, butterflies circle endlessly, drawn as if by invisible threads of longing, their wings scattering dust like shimmering jewels. When she laughs, the sound is like water tumbling over stones, a melody that makes even the most stoic hearts ache with longing. She does not merely walk through the world, she transforms it. The soil softens under her touch, seeds leap to sprout in her shadow, and colors deepen wherever her gaze lingers. Even silence bends around her, not as emptiness, but as a waiting breath, a pause filled with unspoken desire. And yet, beneath this radiant exterior lies the truth of her power. Xochiquetzal was not beauty for its own sake, nor pleasure as an indulgence. She was the embodiment of life's urgency, the reminder that passion and fertility, intimacy and longing are forces that shape destiny. She was the reason flowers bloom, why lovers reach for another in the dark, why the heart aches at the thought of absence. To worship her was to embrace both joy and the pain that shadows it. For every blossom eventually wilts, and every kiss must end. The Aztecs revered her not only as the patroness of lovers, but also as the guardian of artisans, weavers, and those whose hands gave form to beauty. Just as her allure inspired desire, her presence inspired creation. It was said that no craft was lovelier than when done under her blessing, and no love sweeter than when whispered with her name. She was the sacred fire behind all acts of making, whether they shaped a tapestry, a garden, or the tender moment of intimacy between two souls. But where there is beauty, there is danger. To be so desired was to invite pursuit, and pursuit leads to conflict. Gods as mighty as Tezcatlipoca, lord of night and sorcery, were said to covet her. Some myths tell that he carried her away, unable to resist the intoxicating pull of her presence. Others speak of Tlaloc, the rain god, whose storms softened at her touch, though jealousy often brewed in his depths. Mortals, too, wove her into their dreams, praying for her blessing, while knowing it could never truly be theirs. This is where her myth begins, not in stillness, but in motion, a goddess too radiant to remain untouched, too essential to remain unchallenged. Her tale is the tale of longing itself, that endless reaching for something beautiful, knowing it may vanish
at the moment of possession. And so, when we speak of Xuxiquetzal, we speak not just of a goddess, but of the very nature of desire. To long for her is to taste the sweetness of honey and feel the sting of its absence all at once. To dream of her is to be awakened with both ecstasy and emptiness. To seek her is to step into a garden that blooms forever, but whose blossoms dissolve into mist the moment you close your hand around them. Her story lingers because it is not only divine, it is human. Each of us knows the pull of beauty, the intoxication of passion, the ache of wanting what slips through our fingers. Xochiquetzal is the eternal mirror, reflecting the fragile power of our own hearts. She is the goddess who reminds us that desire is both gift and burden, both creation and destruction. So listen, and let her presence wash over you like the perfume of unseen blossoms in the night. Imagine Tamuanchan opening before you, a paradise bathed in light, rivers that sing, gardens that never fade. In its heart stands a goddess of impossible beauty, her eyes carrying the secrets of every longing that ever lived. This is the beginning of her story. This is the first breath of desire. This is Xochiquetzal.
Xochiquetzal's beauty was never silent. It was a melody that wove itself into the hearts of all who saw her, a current of desire that could not be resisted. To speak of her is to speak of a presence that hovered between fragility and overwhelming power. She was as radiant as a field of blossoms at the height of spring, and yet as delicate as a single petal that might crumble under careless touch. In her eyes lay a mystery that drew gods and mortals alike, a promise of tenderness and a threat of sorrow entwined together, inseparable. She was called Precious Feather Flower, a name that captured both her elegance and her elusiveness. Feathers, soft, radiant, ever shifting in the wind. Flowers, sweet, fragrant, ephemeral. Together, the name evoked her essence. To be near her was to feel beauty in its most intoxicating form, and yet to be reminded that beauty can never be contained. She existed at the border of possession and loss, a dream half awake, impossible to hold for long. Around her gathered those who longed, each carrying their own desire, their own hunger. To understand Xochiquetzal's myth, one must understand not only her radiance, but the reflections of that radiance in those who sought her. For it is in the contrasts, the tenderness of some, the ferocity of others, that her story blooms. First among her suitors was Tlaloc, the rain god, lord of storms and fertility. His power was immense, his gift essential. Without his rains, the earth cracked and hunger spread. To mortals, he was both savior and terror, blessing crops with life, yet capable of drowning entire valleys in his floods. Tlaloc was captivated by Xochiquetzal, drawn not only to her beauty, but to what she represented, the fertility of the earth that mirrored his own dominion.
With her at his side, he imagined a union of sky and soil, rain and blossom, desire and renewal. Yet his love was heavy with possession, the way storms grip the land with force. He did not merely admire her, he wanted her as an extension of his power, his storms echoing her softness. And though Xochiquetzal smiled at him, her spirit was not one to be bound by thunder.
Then came Tezcatlipoca, the dark mirror, the god of night, sorcery, and hidden truths. His eyes were obsidian pools, reflecting not the world as it was, but as he desired it to be. Where Tlaloc approached with the heavy certainty of rain, Tezcatlipoca crept with the silence of shadows. He saw in Xochiquetzal not only beauty, but vulnerability. That delicate softness that made her so irresistible. To him, her radiance was a challenge, a treasure to claim, a fire to consume. His love was not gentle, it was hunger, sharpened by envy, sharpened by the knowledge that something so beautiful could not belong to anyone. Legends whisper that he did not wait for her choice. He stole her away in the stillness of night, carrying her into his domain where shadows curled around her like chains. His desire was not for harmony, but for conquest. Yet not all who adored her came with storms or shadows. Among mortals, too, she was worshipped and adored. Craftsmen whispered prayers to her before they set hand to loom or brush, believing her touch would guide their creations to beauty. Lovers whispered her name into the ears of their beloved, as if invoking her essence would sweeten their kisses. Young maidens prayed for her blessing to carry their own allure, while men dreamed of her in restless nights. In every mortal desire she was present, gentle, unreachable, yet shaping the lives of those who sought her blessing. Their love was not born of possession, but of devotion, a reverence that could never be fulfilled, yet never faded. But even among the gods there were those who adored her with tenderness. In some tales she was linked with Xochipilli, the flower prince, god of art, dance, and pleasure. Where others saw in her something to own or conquer, Xochipilli saw her as a mirror of himself, a companion in joy, a muse in the endless celebration of life's fleeting pleasures. Together they embodied the intoxication of beauty, the union of art and desire. With him she found laughter and play, a love less burdened by possession and more by delight. Yet even this tenderness could not shield her from the jealous eyes of others. And so around Xochiquetzal the air was always heavy with longing. Every god who looked upon her saw something different. Tlaloc saw the fertility of the land. Tezcatlipoca saw a treasure to conquer. Xochipilli saw joy reflected. Mortals saw hope and unattainable beauty. Each desire pulled at her from a different direction, weaving a web of yearning that no goddess, no matter how radiant, could escape.
Her interactions with them became the very reflection of human emotions. In Tlaloc's storms, one sees possessiveness of a lover who cannot be denied. In Tezcatlipoca's shadows, one sees obsession and jealousy, the hunger that consumes when beauty cannot be owned. In Xochipilli's laughter, one sees devotion and delight, the way love can bring joy without chains. And in the prayers of mortals, one sees yearning, the quiet ache of those who desire what they know they cannot touch.
But within Xochiquetzal herself lay a paradox. She was radiant, irresistible, yet delicate. She longed to be adored, yet feared to be consumed. She offered tenderness, yet resisted chains. She was the blossom that opened to the sun, yet trembled at the storm. And in this paradox lay her vulnerability, for even as she inspired love, she invited envy, and envy among gods always blossoms into conflict. To imagine her life was to imagine walking through a garden filled with both fragrance and thorns. Every step she took awakened longing. Every smile she gave ignited devotion. Every refusal she spoke planted seeds of resentment. And though she did not seek to wound, she could not help but leave wounds behind. For beauty is both blessing and burden. Her lovers and rivals shaped her myth as much as she shaped theirs. Without Tlaloc's storms, we would not see her defiance. Without Tezcatlipoca's darkness, we would not feel her fragility. Without Xochipilli's joy, we would not know her laughter. Without mortals' yearning, we would not sense her distance. She was a mirror, reflecting all who gazed upon her, transforming their own desires into the story of her being. And so the stage was set, a goddess radiant as the dawn, surrounded by gods whose passions burned too fiercely to be contained, and mortals whose prayers wove her essence into every act of creation and every sigh of longing. Each character drawn to her did not simply desire her. They revealed through their desire the eternal truths of love, jealousy, devotion, and obsession. Xochiquetzal stood at the center of it all, delicate as a flower, yet radiant enough to command the hearts of gods. Around her swirled storms, shadows, laughter, and prayers. And though her smile promised sweetness, each promise carried a shadow. For where beauty blooms, conflict follows, and in the heart of longing lies both ecstasy and sorrow. This was her world, a goddess radiant and delicate, surrounded by lovers and rivals who reflected the vast spectrum of human emotion. Their contrasts sharpened her radiance, their desires defined her myth. In their yearning we see our own. In their envy we see our own. In their devotion we see our own. And in her beauty we see the eternal truth that desire, once awakened, never truly rests. The garden of Xochiquetzal had always been a place of laughter, of blossoms that whispered to the wind and rivers that mirrored the stars. Yet, as her beauty spread across realms, admiration turned to hunger, devotion to rivalry, and what once felt like paradise began to tremble beneath the weight of unspoken desires. For in the heart of every gaze fixed upon her, a question began to burn. Was her beauty meant to be cherished or possessed? It was Tlaloc who first felt the tremor of jealousy coil in his chest. The rain god had once thought her his, for their union had brought together water and flower, storm and fertility. With her beside him, he believed he commanded not only the skies, but the very pulse of life on earth. Yet whispers reached him that other gods lingered in her presence, drawn to the warmth of her smile, to the fragrance of blossoms that followed her everywhere. His storms grew heavier, his thunder louder, as if the sky itself could roar her back into his arms. He loved her, yes, but his love pressed down like rain that drowns as much as it nourishes. Tezcatlipoca, watching from his obsidian mirror, smiled at Tlaloc's restlessness. To him, desire was not tenderness, but conquest, not a gift, but a weapon. He had once stolen her away, spiriting her into shadows where her laughter dimmed, where butterflies no longer circled her hair. He had tasted what it meant to hold her in silence, yet even he, with all his sorcery, could not bind her spirit. She slipped from his grasp as easily as light escapes the night, returning to gardens that bloomed with her freedom. Still, he could not let go. His hunger burned deeper than storms could quench, darker than night could conceal. To him, her freedom was an insult, her laughter a defiance. And so, between rain and shadow, between storm and sorcery, the goddess found herself pulled in opposite directions. Tlaloc's love promised security, yet suffocated. Tezcatlipoca's desire promised intensity, yet consumed. Neither offered what her soul craved, the freedom to bloom as she pleased, to give herself without chains, to dance with butterflies instead of shadows.
Even Xochipilli, the flower prince, who had given her laughter and tenderness, felt the sting of rivalry. He adored her as one adores the spring, fleeting yet intoxicating, but even his devotion trembled under the weight of knowing she could never be only his. In her eyes lay endless horizons, in her smile the promise of eternity. But eternity could not belong to one heart alone. His love, though playful, carried its own ache. Mortals, too, were swept into this tide of longing. They built altars adorned with flowers, weaving tapestries of her image, whispering prayers into the night air. Yet even as they adored her, they feared the wrath of the gods who claimed her. For what mortal hand could compete with divine desire? And yet, desire cares nothing for limits. In their dreams, mortals held her hand, kissed her lips, believed, even for a heartbeat, that the eternal flower could bloom for them alone. The tension grew unbearable. Each god circled her like a hawk, each prayer from mortals like incense rising into her garden. Yet Xochiquetzal herself remained luminous, radiant, fragile yet untamed. She loved freely, laughed easily, gave beauty without hesitation. But when hands closed too tightly, she slipped away like perfume in the wind. She was not a prize to be claimed, and yet they saw her as one. And here lies the heart of the conflict. What is love without possession? For Tlaloc, Love was rain drenching the soil until it could hold no more. For Tezcatlipoca, love was a shadow devouring light until nothing else remained. For Xochipilli, love was laughter shared, yet tinged with the fear of loss. For mortals, love was yearning without hope, worship without touch. Each sought to define her through their desire, but Xochiquetzal resisted, her spirit refusing to be contained. She walked through her gardens with calm grace, yet her heart trembled beneath the weight of their longing. For though she was divine, she was not untouched by emotion. She felt the storm of Tlaluc's possessive love, the hunger of Tezcatlipoca's conquest, the sweetness of Xochipilli's joy, the devotion of mortals' prayers. Each tugged at her differently, and though she bloomed with beauty, she carried within her a quiet ache. To be desired so fiercely was both intoxicating and isolating. There were nights when she sat among her blossoms, fingers tracing petals that would never wilt, and wondered what it meant to be cherished rather than claimed. Was there a love that could see her not as treasure, not as conquest, but as the flower she was, fragile, radiant, alive in her own freedom? Or was she destined always to be the center of desire, caught in a web of longing that would never let her rest? The suspense grew, for the gods' rivalry was not one of words alone. Tlaloc's storms grew wilder, striking lands with floods that mirrored his unrest. Tezcatlipoca's shadows crept longer into gardens, whispering threats in the night. Mortals feared that their quarrels might one day shatter the delicate balance of the world, that flowers might cease to bloom, rains might refuse to fall, and beauty itself might wither beneath divine jealousy. And still, Xochiquetzal stood radiant. Her allure was both the cause and the answer, her presence both balm and spark. She knew the power she carried, knew that in her lay the heartbeat of desire itself. Yet she also knew that desire, once unleashed, could destroy as easily as it could create. What she surrendered, what she resisted, would shape not only her own fate, but the fate of gods and mortals alike. Would she bow to Tlaloc's storms, letting his rain weigh down her blossoms? Would she succumb to Tezcatlipoca's shadows, letting darkness claim her laughter? Would she find solace in Xochipilli's joy, risking the jealousy of others? Or would she choose herself, her freedom, her bloom unbound by hands too heavy to hold her gently? The garden trembled with these questions, every flower bending toward her as though waiting for her choice. The gods watched, mortals prayed, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. For in Xochiquetzal's story, the conflict of love and desire is not only divine, it is eternal. To love is to risk jealousy. To desire is to risk destruction. To seek beauty is to risk losing it the moment you grasp it too tightly. Her myth stood on the edge of decision, balanced between ecstasy and sorrow. For in the heart of every desire that reached for her lay a truth no one wished to face. Beauty cannot be owned, and love that chains is no love at all. And so, beneath blossoms that never faded,
with butterflies circling endlessly, Xochiquetzal carried within her the storm of longing, the pull of rivals, the ache of freedom, and the weight of possession. The tension deepened, the air heavy with yearning. Who would win her? What would she surrender or resist? The answer hovered like perfume in the night, intoxicating and unbearable, waiting for the moment when desire would break into flame.
Night descended over Tamuanshan like a veil of velvet, soft and shimmering with starlight. The air was heavy with fragrance, roses opening in the cool darkness, marigolds glowing like embers, the sweetness of copal drifting upward in curls of smoke. 1,000 blossoms seemed to sigh at once, as though the earth itself knew what was about to unfold. It was a night not meant for silence, but for hearts to burn and voices to clash, for desire to blaze like a fire that could no longer be contained. Xochiquetzal stood at the heart of her garden, her body bathed in moonlight so gentle it seemed to worship her skin. Her hair spilled down her shoulders in waves of black, jeweled with butterflies whose wings reflected the stars. She was radiant, fragile, infinite, the embodiment of spring's most intoxicating moment, that heartbeat before petals fall. Yet around her the air trembled, for passion had ripened into conflict, and conflict had ripened into this night. From the east came Tlaloc, the storm god, his arrival heralded by the deep rumble of thunder. Clouds gathered in his wake, heavy with rain, his eyes glinting with lightning. He looked at her as though the very earth belonged beneath his reign, as though she too should yield. His voice rolled like thunder through the garden. "You are mine, flower of eternity. Without my rains, your blossoms would wither. Without my waters, no garden could hold your fragrance. Stand beside me, and I will drench the world in life, in fertility, in endless bloom." His words carried both promise and threat, a devotion that pressed too tightly, love that risked drowning the very thing it adored. From the west came Tezcatlipoca, clothed in shadow, the obsidian mirror clutched in his hand. His steps were silent, yet the air grew heavy with each one, as if darkness itself bent to his will. His gaze fixed on Xochiquetzal with an intensity that pierced, a hunger sharpened by envy. "You are not a blossom to be watered by storms, nor laughter to be shared by others," he hissed softly, his voice like silk over steel. "You are mine to claim, mine to hold. The night hides no secrets from me, and neither will you. In my arms, your radiance will burn brighter than the sun, even if the world must be covered in shadow to keep you." Where Tlaloc's passion sought to envelop, Tezcatlipoca's sought to consume. His desire was fire hidden within ice, a love that was more a prison than a promise. And from the south came Xochipilli, the flower prince, his arrival softer but no less powerful. Around him danced the spirits of music and joy, petals swirling at his feet, laughter echoing faintly in his wake. His eyes sought Xochiquetzal not with hunger, but with tenderness, a love that did not wish to bind, but to share.
"Beloved flower," he whispered, his voice like a flute carried on the breeze, "you are not meant to be caged by storm or shadow. You are the dance of life itself, and I would only dance beside you. Let us bloom together in joy, without chains, without sorrow." His words were a balm against the storm and shadow, yet even sweetness carries its own weight, for even joy can demand. The three gods stood before her, each reflecting a face of desire, possession, conquest, devotion. The night thickened around them, every flower leaning closer, every butterfly pausing mid-flight, as if even wings held their breath. Xochiquetzal felt their gazes upon her like fire on her skin. Her heart beat with the rhythm of drums, with the pulse of blood rushing through her veins. Desire, devotion, obsession, each offered her eternity, yet each threatened to strip her freedom. The garden responded to their presence. Blossoms burst open with sudden force, petals spilling like rain. The air grew intoxicating with fragrance, so sweet it made the gods' voices tremble. Butterflies swirled in dizzying spirals, their wings scattering dust that shimmered like sparks. The very night pulsed with temptation, as though the world itself had been drawn into the tension between them. Tlaloc stepped forward, rain dripping from his hands like pearls. "Choose me, and the skies will never deny you. With me, you will reign as queen of storm and soil alike." His storm swelled, thunder booming above as if to underscore his vow. Tezcatlipoca moved closer, shadows coiling around his arms like serpents. "Choose me, and the world itself will bend before us. None will ever look upon you without fear, without reverence. In shadow, you will be untouchable." His eyes glimmered with desire, sharp and dangerous. Xochipilli reached out with hands that bore no storm, no shadow, only blossoms. "Choose me, and laughter will never leave your lips. We will weave a world of joy, a dance of endless spring." His words fell like petals, soft yet piercing in their hope. Xochiquetzal's breath caught in her chest. The air itself was too heavy, perfumed to the point of intoxication. Her lips parted, and for a moment even the gods stilled, waiting for the answer that might unmake or remake their world. But her beauty was not passive, her desire was not without will. She stepped forward, her bare feet pressing into the earth, each step coaxing flowers to bloom at once. Her voice rose above the storm, above the shadows, above the song of blossoms. "Do you not see? I am not yours to bind. I am not a prize, nor a jewel, nor a shadow's prisoner. I am the bloom that opens to the sun and closes to the night. I am the breath of desire itself. If you love me, you must love me as I am, unbound, unbroken, as fleeting as a petal upon the wind." Her words were both surrender and defiance, both intimacy and rejection. She did not give herself to one, yet she gave herself to all, in the way beauty does, offering presence, not possession. The air trembled. Tlaloc's storm crashed in rage, lightning splitting the sky. Tezcatlipoca's shadows writhed, snarling with hunger. Xochipilli wept with joy and sorrow all at once, his blossoms trembling in the rain. The contrast was unbearable. Thunder and silence, devotion and obsession, tenderness and violence colliding in one unbearable moment. The garden shook, blossoms torn apart by storm, shadows devouring petals as even new flowers bloomed in the wake. The fragrance grew suffocating, sweetness thick enough to choke, desire pressing down like a weight upon every breath. Xochiquetzal stood in the center, radiant and fragile, her body trembling with the force of so many gazes, so many desires. For one heartbeat, it seemed she might break, that the goddess of flowers might shatter beneath the storm of passion. But she did not. Instead, she bloomed brighter. Her hair glowed with the light of stars. Her skin shimmered with moonlight. Her laughter, soft, trembling, defiant, cut through thunder and shadow alike. She became not possession, not conquest, not joy alone, but all of them, transcending what any could hold. And in that moment, the world held its breath. The climax of desire had arrived, unbearable in its beauty, terrifying in its intensity. Every flower, every star, every god and mortal felt it, the point where longing could no longer be contained, where beauty itself threatened to tear the world apart.
The night of blossoms and storms did not end in stillness. Desire, once unleashed, could not simply dissolve into silence. It left echoes, scars, and memories as enduring as the fragrance of flowers that linger after they fall. For Xochiquetzal's choice to belong to none, to bloom in freedom, did not soothe the hearts that longed for her. It deepened their hunger, sharpened their envy, and wove her fate into one of beauty entwined with sorrow. Tlaloc's storms raged across the valleys for days. His rivers, once gifts of fertility, overflowed their banks in grief and anger. Crops drowned, villages vanished beneath the weight of his sorrow. His heart, heavy with rejection, beat with thunder that shook both gods and mortals. He had offered her the security of his waters, yet she had slipped through his grasp like rain through cupped hands. Love had turned to wrath, devotion to destruction. And though his storm would eventually subside, the memory of losing her etched itself into his very being, leaving behind a bitterness that would never fade. Tezcatlipoca, in contrast, did not weep or rage openly. He withdrew into his obsidian mirror, his shadows curling tighter around him. But in his silence grew an obsession darker than before. He had stolen her once, and she had escaped. Now her defiance became his torment, her laughter his curse. He swore in whispers that if he could not possess her, no one would. To him, beauty that resisted chains was an insult, a wound to his pride. His love transformed into a hunger sharpened by vengeance. And though he retreated that night, his shadow never ceased to stretch toward her, waiting, plotting, hungering. Xochipilli, the flower prince, stood among the wreckage of blossoms torn by storm and shadow, his heart split between joy and sorrow. He had seen her bloom in defiance, radiant and unbound, and he adored her for it. Yet he also knew that her freedom meant she could never fully remain by his side. He loved her laughter, her presence, her tenderness, but hers was a love too vast to be captured by one heart. For him, the outcome was bittersweet. He had loved without chains, and thus he had loved truthfully. But in that truth was the ache of knowing she would always slip away, carried like fragrance on the breeze.
And what of mortals? They felt the consequences in every harvest, every prayer. Tlaloc's storms left them fearful, whispering that the goddess's rejection had cursed their lands. Some wept at their flooded fields, yet still placed flowers on her altars, still sang her name into the night air. For even when desire brought ruin, beauty was too intoxicating to abandon. Mortals adored her as they always had, their devotion tinged now with sorrow, their prayers carrying not only longing but lament. In their hearts, Xochiquetzal became not just the goddess of beauty and love, but also the goddess of loss, the reminder that all things cherished are fragile, that passion blooms and fades like a flower. And Xochiquetzal herself? Her freedom had been defended, but at a price. She had resisted the storm, resisted the shadow, embraced her essence as the bloom unbound. Yet the consequence of her choice was exile of a kind. Tlaloc's love had curdled into wrath, Tezcatlipoca's desire into obsession, Xochipilli's devotion into sorrow. The garden of Tamuanchan still bloomed around her, but its fragrance was tinged with melancholy, for she knew that beauty invites pursuit, and pursuit never rests. In some tellings of her myth, it is said that Tezcatlipoca eventually made good on his whispered vow. When her laughter grew too bright, when her freedom blossomed too fully, he stole her away once more, hiding her in shadow so thick that even butterflies could not follow. In those tales, she became the goddess of both love and lamentation, her radiance veiled in sorrow, her beauty bound by chains of envy. And yet even in shadow, blossoms bloomed around her, for beauty cannot be destroyed, only transformed. In other tellings of her myth, she remained free, but freedom itself was her burden. Loved by all, she belonged to none. Adored, yet endlessly pursued. She walked among mortals in whispers and dreams, a muse who inspired both ecstasy and ache. Her presence brought fertility to fields, sweetness to kisses, laughter to homes. But her absence, inevitable as the falling of petals, brought longing so sharp it cut like a blade. Such is the outcome of desire too fierce to be contained.
Beauty becomes eternal, not in possession, but in memory. Xochiquetzal's myth became less about what she gave and more about what could never be held. She was the fleeting bloom that no hand could keep, the fragrance that lingers after the flower falls, the kiss remembered long after the lips part.
The gods learned their lessons, though bitterly. Tlaloc's storms softened with time, his fury tempered by necessity, for even grief cannot drown the earth forever. Tezcatlipoca's obsession smoldered on, feeding his shadows, shaping new stories of envy and vengeance. Xochipilli continued to dance, his joy tinged with a sadness that only deepened his art. And mortals continued to weave her name into flowers, prayers, and longing sighs. As for Xochiquetzal, she walked forever between adoration and loss. She was loved too fiercely to know peace, pursued too endlessly to know rest, yet her spirit remained unbroken, radiant in its fragility. She accepted the price of beauty, that to be so deeply desired is to carry both ecstasy and sorrow, to inspire both tenderness and violence, to be both muse and prisoner. And so her myth reached its resolution, not in triumph, not in defeat, but in the bittersweet truth of desire itself. She was not possessed, yet neither was she free from longing's consequences. She bloomed, radiant and unbound, yet every petal carried the shadow of those who had tried to claim her. She was eternal not because she belonged to any, but because she slipped from all, becoming instead the flower etched into memory, into prayer, into the ache of every heart that ever loved something fleeting. This was the price of her beauty. Storms that raged, shadows that consumed, devotion that wept, prayers that never ceased. This was the price of desire, to love what cannot be held, to worship what must eventually fade, to ache for what lingers only in memory. And this was the outcome of her myth, a story not of conquest, but of longing eternalized. Xochiquetzal became not simply the goddess of love, but the eternal reminder that passion is both gift and wound, both bloom and wither. To adore her was to accept sorrow. To long for her was to taste sweetness and bitterness in the same breath. She was beauty, fulfilled yet fleeting, love lost yet immortalized, desire that could never rest. And even now, when flowers bloom and butterflies gather, when laughter carries on the wind, or when longing strikes the heart without warning, her presence lingers. For Xochiquetzal's outcome was not only written in the quarrels of gods or the prayers of mortals, it was written into the very fabric of desire itself.
The tale of Xochiquetzal is not merely a story of gods quarreling for love, nor of one goddess slipping between the grasp of desire and devotion. It is a mirror, polished by time, in which we see ourselves, our longings, our frailties, our passions that bloom as fiercely as they fade. For in her beauty lies the truth of all beauty, that it cannot be held forever, and yet it is remembered eternally. Her myth is the echo of every sigh that has ever trembled on a lover's lips, the shadow behind every embrace that ends, the sweetness of every kiss destined to fade. To listen to her story is to be reminded that love is always a balance between the flower's bloom and its inevitable fall, between the rapture of desire and the ache of loss. She embodies not just the goddess of beauty, but the fragility of every moment we cherish, the reminder that passion is both a gift and a wound. Mortals in their temples and gardens felt this truth keenly. They offered her flowers, knowing they would wither, yet still they placed them upon her altars. They whispered her name into the night, knowing the sound would vanish with the dawn, yet still they whispered. For the act itself was enough, to offer beauty, even knowing it fades, to love, even knowing it might wound, to remember, even when possession is impossible. In this, the people of long ago were no different from us. For who among us has not loved something we could not hold? Who has not reached for a hand that slipped away, or pressed a kiss into memory alone? Who has not felt the intoxication of beauty, only to grieve as it passed like a fragrance carried away by the wind? These are not the sorrows of gods alone. They are ours, as old as humanity itself. Shushketzal's fate teaches us that to love is to risk both ecstasy and loss, that to be drawn into passion is to accept its impermanence, its sharp edges, its fleetingness. Yet her story also tells us that this fleetingness is what makes love eternal. For it is not in possession that love is immortalized, it is in remembrance. We recall the laughter, the bloom, the fragrance. We recall the way beauty illuminated us, even if only for a moment. And in that memory, the goddess lives on. Even now, her presence lingers in the soft petals of flowers, in the flutter of butterflies, in the sigh of wind through a garden. Whenever beauty strikes us silent, whenever desire pulls us into longing, whenever love both delights and wounds us, we are living her myth anew. She has not vanished, she simply resides in every experience of passion that touches the human heart.
And perhaps that is the truest gift of her story, not to promise eternal possession, but to remind us that transience itself is sacred. A flower is most beautiful because it fades. A kiss is most treasured because it ends. A love is most profound because it cannot last untouched by time. The ache is what gives the sweetness its depth, the fleetingness its eternity. So let us walk away from her myth with more than sorrow. Let us carry with us the wisdom of her fragrance, that to cherish beauty is not to cage it, but to honor it as it passes, that to love is not to control, but to allow, that to remember is a form of devotion as powerful as possession. For Shuxi-Quetzal was not diminished by being unpossessed. She was made eternal because she slipped through hands, because she became memory, prayer, longing. She reminds us that what is ungraspable may still be unforgettable, that passion's mark once left cannot be erased even by time or shadow. In this way, she belongs not only to the Aztec pantheon, not only to gods and mortals of her age, but to every heart that has ever loved. She is ours, not in chains or in possession, but in reflection. When we see beauty we cannot hold, when we feel love we cannot keep, when we sigh at what has passed but still cherish it, she is with us.
And so, the story closes not with a storm or with shadow, but with a whisper. A flower's last fragrance carried on the wind. A kiss left lingering in memory. A goddess who remains not because she stayed, but because she passed, and in passing left eternity behind. We remember her not as a possession, but as a presence, not as a lover bound, but as a bloom eternal, not as a goddess distant, but as beauty itself, fragile, fleeting, unforgettable. Yet to understand Xochiquetzal only as loss would be incomplete. She is also renewal. Just as flowers bloom each season despite their fragility, so too does love return, in new forms, in new faces. She teaches us that passion is never wasted. Even when it ends, it leaves behind seeds that grow again in the hearts of those willing to feel. In this way, every act of love is both an ending and a beginning. This is why poets continue to speak her name, why her myth was never erased by time. For she represents the eternal cycle, desire awakening, passion burning, beauty fading, memory enduring. This cycle is the rhythm of life itself. It is in the beating of our hearts, in the breath of longing that escapes us when we see someone beautiful, in the ache when that moment cannot last. She is the pulse of life embodied in myth. If you close your eyes now, you can almost feel her presence, the brush of silken petals against your skin, the scent of blossoms carried on warm winds, the sound of laughter fading like bells in the distance. She is not gone. She is there wherever beauty and longing meet. She is not simply a goddess of the past. She is a goddess of every present moment we dare to love. And so the lesson is clear. Do not fear love because it will fade. Do not deny desire because it may wound. Do not avoid beauty because it cannot be held. Instead, embrace them, as fleeting and fragile as they are, for in their passing they leave you transformed. Xochiquetzal whispers this truth to every lover who has ever dared to give their heart, that the ache of impermanence is not a curse, but the price of touching eternity. To live is to love. To love is to risk. To risk is to bloom, and to bloom is to fade, and yet, in fading, to be remembered forever. This is the paradox she embodies, the paradox that makes her divine. So let this story linger with you, not as a warning, but as an invitation. The next time you see a flower, pause, breathe it in. The next time you feel desire stir within you, do not silence it. The next time you love, even knowing it may end, love fully. In these small acts, you honor Xochiquetzal. You let her myth continue, not in temples or offerings, but in the quiet bloom of your own heart. And when the night falls, when silence wraps around you, and you find yourself remembering someone you have loved, whether still near or long gone, know that you are keeping her alive. For memory is devotion, and longing is prayer. And Xochiquetzal, the flower goddess, lives wherever love is remembered.
Thus the story ends as it began, with a fragrance on the wind, soft and ungraspable, yet unforgettable. She is the bloom that will always fade, the kiss that will always linger, the passion that will always return. She is not ours to keep, but she is ours to feel forever.